Hello, BookTube. It's time for our book to film this week. Let's see if I can get it without glare. All Quiet on the Western Front. The book was written in 1928 by Erich Maria Remarque, and the film was produced by Universal Studios in 1930, starring Lew Ayres and directed by Louis Milestone. And yeah, it's a brutal book and a brutal film in many ways, because it's definitely anti-war, and it starts out uh, with raid on the front lines where they haven't had much food for a while, and there's a mix up in the catering, that they get sent rations for 150 men, and there's only 80 of them there. And they get sort of 10 cigars, 20 cigarettes, and 2 plugs of chewing tobacco for everyone. And the narrator is Paul. And he's saying that he trades his chewing tobacco for somebody else's 20 cigarettes, and it's like, well, having 40 cigarettes will just get you through the day. And it continues on, and it's quite brutal. Let's see. Just they're in many battles. There's a number of other characters, like then they sort of you get a little bit of the backstory where Paul joined up with classmates in school, and he's only like 19, 20 throughout the story. Yeah, and I'm just gonna go through some, because it's pretty simple in its sort of storyline. It's brutal, and it's mostly interspersed with these scenes of utter insanity and brutality in many ways. Let me see here. Uh, I put bookmarks in each of them, but there's some that I'll skip because it would take too long to go through this. But there's a lot of, it's like, you can almost smell the way things are. Because, like, in one near the beginning of the book, it says, here's a quote, "We've sprawled out on the sunny side of the camp. It smells of tar, summertime, and sweaty feet." And that's the sort of most nicest description, because they also talk about bodies that they can't get from no man's land in between the two trenches. And in the summertime, they bloat up and make hissing noises. So yeah, so it's, he describes that quite clearly. Yeah, there's like in his first sort of big bombardment, there's screaming, but the screaming goes on after the bombardment stops, and his friend Kaczynski, Kat, who sort of he rummages, he gets food for him himself and others, but he says the screaming is horses, and he's describing the sound as nothing like that, nothing like anything at all, is the screaming of horses. And also the reason, and they look through, they can see some horses, and there's one with its intestines that are hanging out, and it's running around in circles, tripping on its intestine, and it's just horrific. The depictions of things. And there's another one where they're in like, all of a sudden you see something black flying through the air and over top of them, and it turns out that they're in a cemetery, and the shelling is like blowing up and popping up coffins, left, right, and center. It's yeah, um, yeah. I just like I could go on and on. There's so many. There's so many depictions of things like that, of being hit with shrapnel and everything, and it just follows Paul through all these things. He does get leave. He goes home, and he sees his family. And a lot of people are there think that he's, it's glorious too, because his teacher thought it was glorious to go out and fight for the fatherland and die. And it's pretty clear that Paul's saying, like, there is no heroism. There's the only thing that's come out of the war is sort of camaraderie between the men, and there are no it's like, it's funny. I can't help but compare the two, because last week we did a Farewell to Arms by uh, um, oh, my brain is just gone. Farewell to Arms by Hemingway. And he's got this soppy love story in there that just doesn't really fit. And like, it's just like a very, very poor version of a war book is A Farewell to Arms. This one is, it's realistic and quite brutal. They're stationed at one spot at one point, uh, on one side of a canal, and on the other side it's in France. So there's some French women there, but they're not allowed to cross over the canal, or they will get shot by their own army. Almost like it's for desertion or something, or they're not allowed to go across, but they do sneak across at nighttime. They sort of swim across naked, and with their boots holding their boots up above the water. They take cigarettes, bread, and they meet a bunch of women. It's pretty clear, I guess. Well, they're prostitutes, so they trade favors for bread and cigarettes. Um, and it just it goes on. Like, he does get wounded. They're in a hospital, um, and it's just talking about the brutal thing. There's a room called the death room or something like that, and anybody who goes there never comes back. And there's one guy that's being taken there. They're saying they're going to take him for change his bandages, but they take his clothes, and he's screaming. Like, he said he will be back, and he does come back. And it was like, there's one guy there that says, it's never been known anybody to come back from the death room. So Paul, he's there with his friend Albert, who loses his leg, and is very despondent about it. He's already seen a school friend, lose his leg and just die in front of him in the hospital prior to that. So he's worried about his friend, but Paul, gets better, and he goes back to the front, and it's a first person account by Paul, with a little bit of non first person, but especially at the end, it's almost as if it's a part of a report, an official report, basically saying, well, let's just read what it says here. It says here, he fell on October 1918, on a day that was so still and quiet along the entire front line that the army dispatches restricted themselves to the single sentence that there was nothing new to report on the Western Front. In other words, all quiet on the Western Front. And it sort of takes it out of that, the first person, because obviously he can't describe his own death. And I'm really surprised this 1929, and they immediately, Universal got decided to do it. There's not much on the film here. For background information, there's no commentary, and I haven't done a huge. I do want to do some research into it, and I've realized I forgot I had this for a while, but it's like a 200 and some page book by Taurus Publishers. It's the filming of All Quiet on the Western Front. It's by Andrew Kelly. I bought this. About 8-9 years ago. No, more. No, actually, yeah, more than 10 years ago, from a Remainder Place that I purchased from, and I remember I think it was only 99p on sale, so I grabbed it, and I hadn't seen the movie for probably, well, at that point probably a good 10-15 years. So it's like over 20 years since I've seen the film, but I knew I was interested in it and I really liked the film, and I knew I would get around to this sometime, and I forgot I had this, and while I was sort of finishing it, I was like, oh, I got something about this, and I could see it then finally on the top shelf, but I'm just not in the frame of mind with my long COVID and the brain fog to read through this properly. I might. It's short chapters, so what I might do is just to my own interest, start reading this. But also too, there was because this is being 1930. There was a silent version that was put out as well for the theaters, cinemas that weren't wired for sound, because it was still early days. And I'd always thought, because I remember a discussion one time saying that the silent version was lost. And then I bought this here. It was really cheap because I didn't know which one to buy, but this was only like, $3.99 or $4.99 or something like that. And I knew it was just a plain film. It's just saying the film. It's got a little introduction, a 2.5 minute introduction by Rudy Belmer, who hosts the TCM. And it's got, it says bonus features, but the silent version is on here as well. It doesn't say anywhere on the back, and I'm really happy about that. I haven't watched it yet, so I'm actually gonna wait for that. I'm going to do at some point read this here book, which is going to be as good or better than having a commentary, I'm sure, because it's 200 and like just over 200 pages. So that'll be a nice thing to do at some point. And there's changes in the film, because in the film, in the book, it starts out that they're right already at the front. The film, films the like a prologue basically of them before they go to war. Is that their teacher sort of building them up and saying, how great it is and heroic to die for the fatherland. So the whole class gets, all hepped up and hyped up about this, and they all, enlist. And then they start seeing the realities of things. Like there's one scene, and it's in the book as well, where like one of the characters basically craps his pants, his trousers, and and the one guy saying it happens to everyone, just get rid of your underwear. But yeah, because they're just scared for this. But that's not in the book. As I say, there's bits of that, but it's sort of in hindsight, little bits of it talking about it. And in the film, they've got a little more sort of comedy relief, a little bit with his friends, than it is in the book. But there is a little bit in there in the book as well, but not as much. And there's the horse scene is not in there of the horses. They describe some other scenes, and there is a scene that is in there from the film. I mean, from the book, where somebody is, in the film, it's a French soldier, but I can't remember because I didn't put that. I didn't put in a bookmark where that was. It's of a soldier of some sort, with like coming up to the wire, and I think it's holding on to the wire, and then all of a sudden a shell goes off, and all you see is the hands down to the elbow, and that's it. Just hanging on the wire. That's it. And it's like a horrific scene the way it's described in the book, and even more so because in the film, there's other scenes that aren't filmed either, where there's trench mortars that are sound just horrific, and they're walking along, and all of a sudden they see part of a human sitting, a corpse sitting in a tree naked, like it's basically just from the waist up. But what happened was that the trench mortars will blow off the clothing. So they'll find in another tree or somewhere else the clothing, the uniform of the soldier, and their body or parts of their body, all over the place. That's not in the film. I forgot I was going to mention that in the. But as I say, there's so you could just go crazy on the horrific scenes that are described in the book. Um, but yeah, like I say, the horse scene isn't there. They change things around a little bit when because Paul, when he goes home for leave, it's after he gets injured, yeah, after he gets wounded, and he's the one that gets sent to this death room, um, to get his bandage changed. So he's screaming that he will be back, and he does come back, but he comes back to find his friend has had his leg amputated. Uh, and there's a little more to do with the with that place because it's run by Catholic nurses, sisters, and in the book they make a lot of racket, like praying and doing stuff at nighttime, and the men are trying to sleep, and they're shouting to tell them to shut up, and they're saying, "Oh, we're praying for you," and they're just saying, we don't give up, they don't say that in those words, but they're basically that's what they're saying. And then Paul throws a bottle out into one of the things, and it explodes. And then all of a sudden they do close the door, so somebody takes the blame for it. But it's a guy who has had a head injury, who he says he's got a pass because it says that he can't be held responsible for doing irrational acts. So he says he threw the bottle, so it gets Paul off the case. But again, that's not in the film, and it really there's some really great scenes. Like it's like when in the first big battle in the film, you've got the French attacking, um, and you've got a panning from left to right across the screen, uh, and they're machine gunning, and there's men running up to the wire, and that's where you see the hands. And it's just a track. There's several tracking scenes, and they're just bodies falling. Just you see the machine gun just taking everybody out along this, and it just continues and continues and continues. Like I was sitting there trying to sort of count the number of like dead that there were, and it's like there's probably within less than a 10-minute scene, there's probably 150 or more deaths. I don't know if anything has been like that in like a classic film. It's up to that point, obviously nothing has ever been like that. And then the interesting thing is for the photography as well, is because they show it from both things, usually from like the top of the trenches, but as I say, they panned left to right across the screen, tracking shot of the French coming, and then they have the reversal of that where the Germans, Paul's contingent, attacks, counterattacks and goes after the French. So then you've got the French with the machine guns, and you've got a tracking scene from right to left of the same thing. The bodies dropping on the other side of the wire. It's just done in the opposite direction, and it's just the desolation of the countryside is just horrific. Like all you see is like bare trees, and it's just gray, black mud, water, rats in the in the infested with rats in the trenches, in the dugouts. It's not like it would probably wouldn't have been fun filming this either, but or at least for the actors. But it's just, yeah, it's quite brutal. It's like I've used that word several times, but it's the only word that really fits, and is realistic, I believe too. And it was considered to be an important film, and it still is an important film for anti-war. Um, and the way it ends, like in the book, it ends, as I say, with this report of Paul getting killed. So I remember seeing an interview with Lewis Milestone of trying to figure out how to do this, because they couldn't really film this. But throughout the story, or at least not throughout, but there's a scene where Paul goes back home and he looks at some butterflies that are in frames, and he used to catch butterflies, and he has that, and it's in the book as well. So in the film, um, they show him, it's like, you can tell that it's sort of a slow day. There's not much happening. There's some with cans, take trying to get the water out of the trench that is waist or chest high, and then they show Paul there with a little lookout window, and he looks out and he sees a butterfly, and he reaches for it through the little opening, but he can't reach it, so he reaches over top, and he reaches, as he's reaching out to it, there's a French sniper that shoots him, and it's just like they don't show the bullet going in. It's like you hear the sound and the hand pulling back, and then all of a sudden silence. The music stops, everything stops, and then it shows a scene from earlier when they were first going up to the front to put wire on the redo the barbed wire, and they're all like, as the truck leaves, they're all looking back over their right shoulders, so they have that superimposed on a field of crosses, and again, silent, no music, nothing, and it just, and then it just fades to black and then says the end. It's a beautiful way to end this film, and it's sort of, in some ways, I wish they would have filmed some of these other scenes in it. It would have been brutal. Like it wouldn't have probably got past. They wouldn't have. They probably said no, we can't film these things because they're too graphic. But if it was done correctly, and I think that's where with the sound was, you have to have, like, the narration that's in the book about this, rather than just showing it, because if you show sometimes violence too much, I think anyway, it becomes fetishized in some ways. So if you show it, but you show the emotional impact either by somebody describing it, and things like that, and through their voice, it takes away that fetishization, and it's not sensational anymore. It's a good punch of how how horrifying everything is. And there's also a discussion in there about, like, who starts the war, and that's in the book as in the film, and it's pretty close to the book. And the one guy says, "Oh, it's like when one country gets offended by another," and the guy says, "Oh, so what do you mean? A mountain in Germany offends a mountain in France? How does that work?" And he's going, "No, stupid. It's like people." I said, "Well, I'm not offended, so I'll just go home." And they're just, they're just trying to make sense of, why there's a war. And it reminded me, that conversation reminded me of Blackadder. I don't know if anybody's seen the Blackadder Goes Forth, where there's a discussion of, like, why war between, I think, Baldric and Blackadder. He's telling him, because they're just crazy. And it just ends with us. I think that or another scene too there is, like, we could have just stayed at home and got rid of all this craziness and just shot 10,000 of our own men every week, and just saved the trouble. And like, I know people were offended by that comment, but it's a great comment. It's so black of a comment, which is so true. It's like, yeah, why, it would have been just as easy just to stay at home and shoot 10,000 of their own men. rather than go through all this trouble, because that's especially the First World War has been considered as sort of the war with, like, why why did this happen, why it was a useless war, it just it didn't do anything, and then this is the thing, like in the book too, it's like they attack, they get up, and then they move back, and then they change positions, and they don't get anywhere, they don't do anything other, the only thing that happens is they're hungry, they're full of lice, and there's rats, and they're dying, horrifically dying. You know, the doctor is like in the medic station. He's like been amputating legs since like 5 a.m. or something like that, and it's now in the afternoon, or later at night. It's just it's just like why, and that's the whole point of this. But anyway, it's, if you haven't seen the film, if you're not really squeamish, I would say it's worth watching, because it's an important film for cinema history. It's one of those things. And like last week, as I said, we did Farewell to Arms. I like the film Farewell to Arms because I like the way it was filmed, and I like the director, Frank Borzage. That was several years after this, but it's not near as anti-war as All Quiet on the Western Front. There's a few war films that are just, especially World War I films, that are fabulous. It's like the silent ones, The Big Parade, by King Vidor, Wings by William Wellman, Wild Bill Wellman. Those are just fabulous war films, and then there's other ones that are just over the top, where they're propaganda ones, showing Germans as really bad people, like Erich von Stroheim. There's a scene in one, I can't remember the film now, but he's like on a balcony, and there's a woman there and their baby, so like he's playing like this Teutonic German officer. He picks up the baby and hurls it over the balcony. It is just way over the top, and that's how they sort of did it a lot of times. Another one that's great too is J'accuse by Abel Gance, which is earlier. It's 1919. It's another anti-war film. Like these are important films, important films, period, but definitely important war films. And there's not a lot. There's a lot of good war films, but there's like, I'm talking on a different level of important ones. But anyway, if you're interested, yeah, I would say definitely search it out. Definitely read the book. I would say it's something. There's a sequel called The Road Back, which I'm going to read shortly. I should have read it this past week, but things didn't work out that well. So anyway, so that ends All Quiet on the Western Front, this week's book to film. I'm not sure what I'm going to do next week. I haven't decided yet. So that'll be a bit of a surprise, actually. I'll let you know probably in the Friday reads. But I'll be back tomorrow with hopefully with my last shelf tour of my transport section. Hopefully tomorrow, and then I'll see you. Hopefully something on Wednesday. I haven't figured that out yet, but I hope everybody's doing well for the weekend. Take care, and reading. Any questions, or you know you want to question anything about films stuff, because film is a big thing for me, and I just wish, like, I'm watching these films now, and I just wish I could pull off so much nonfiction stuff, but I'm really struggling with it. But I'm definitely going to be, before I watch the silent version on here, which I'm so glad this is on here, and especially it's such a low price. I don't know if there's any other versions of this. I knew there was another version. I think it was 2 Blu-rays, but I don't think it really has any extras on it either. So and it's a good print. This one here, well, in the UK, I guess it's the 100th Universal 100th anniversary, and the film won 2 Academy Awards. It won the Best Picture Award. It's the first Academy Award for Universal. But anyway, take care, everybody, and I will see you next time.